All right, so now that you know what rational numbers are, we're going to work on adding rational numbers. Let's look at example 1. Malachi hikes for 2.5 miles and stops for lunch. Then he hikes 1.5 more miles. How many miles did he hike altogether? Well, 1.5 more than 2.5, we're going to add those together. So first come up with a plan, then we're going to find 2.5 plus 1.5. We're going to use a number line to help us, and we're going to start at 2.5 on the number line. That's right here. And then we're going to add 1.5. You move 1.5 units to the right because the second addend is positive. The result is 4. You might have learned this in the past as 2.5 plus 1.5, where you then add 5 plus 5 is 10. Write the 0, carry the 1. 1 plus 2 plus 1 is 4. And then the decimal goes straight down, so 4.0. Malachi hiked 4 miles. The difference in 7th grade is that now we're going to be doing this stuff, but we're going to have positive and negative rational numbers because rational numbers can be both positive and negative. All right, so example B. Kyle pours out 3/4 liter of liquid from a beaker. Then he pours out another 1/2 liter of liquid. What is the overall change in the amount of liquid in the beaker? Well, you're starting with a certain amount. When you pour out, that's represented by a negative number. So we're going to use negative numbers to represent the amount of change because he's pouring them out. So he starts by pouring out negative 3/4. Oops. He starts by pouring out 3/4, so we're going to represent that with negative 3/4. Then he pours out 1/2, so we're going to represent that as negative 1/2. So our plan is to find negative 3/4 plus negative 1/2. We can also represent this on a number line. So here is where negative 3/4 are. So each dash is a fourth. We move negative 1 2/4 because 2/4 is 1/2. And we end at 1 and 1/4. Negative 1 and 1/4. That's our answer. All right, so before we move on, let's reflect on this a little bit. Explain how to determine whether to move right or left. On a number line, you move right when you're adding a positive, and you move left or further negative from 0 when you're adding a negative number, or when you're subtracting a positive. Same thing. And remember, subtracting a negative turns into adding a positive. All right, so pause the video, see if you can do both 2 and 3 on your own. Play it back to check. Go. All right, example 2 focuses on adding rational numbers with different signs. So we've been adding a negative and a negative, or a positive and a positive. Now we're going to add a positive and a negative. So during the day, the temperature increases by 4.5 degrees. It increases by 4.5. At night, the temperature decreases by 7.5. What is the overall change? Well, we're going to represent an increase in temperature with a positive number, and we're going to represent a decrease in temperature with a negative number. So we have positive 4.5 minus 7.5 or plus negative 7.5. So we're going to start at 4.5 on a number line, and then we're going to move left because we're moving negative 7.5. Now, when I move on a number line, I like to do the half first, especially if you're already starting at a half. So we move a half, and then we move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we end at negative 3. All right, example B, Ernesto writes a check for $2.50. Then he deposits $6 in his checking account. What is the overall increase or decrease in the account balance? Well, when he writes a check, remember that's money being taken out of the account, so we're going to represent that with a negative. And then when he deposits, he puts money into the account, or he adds to it, so we're going to represent that with a positive. So we have negative 2.5 because that was the check, that was what was withdrawn, and then positive 6 because that's what was added. So we're going to start at negative 2.5, and then now when we add 6, we're going to move to the halves between each number. So we're going to move 1, notice I'm between negative 1 and negative 2, 2, I'm between 0 and negative 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the answer is $3.50 or $3.50. All right, so let's reflect on this a little bit. We have -3 plus 2 and 2 plus -3. Do they have the same sum? It doesn't matter if the negative number is the first addend or the second addend. This is actually called the commutative property, which does apply to addition. So they do have the same sum. It doesn't matter if it's the first addend or the second addend. If you're adding, it doesn't matter what order they're in, you're going to get the same answer. So let's try that out. -3 plus 2, if I'm on a number line, and say this is 0, so -1, -2, -3, this is 1. If I start at -3 and I add 2, I'm going to end at -1. If I start at 2 and I add -3, 1, 2, 3, I'm also going to end at -1. All right, make a conjecture. Do you think the sum of a negative number and a positive number will always be negative? Well, what do you think? It depends on which number has a greater absolute value. So in that problem we just did, number 4, the absolute value of -3 is bigger than the absolute value of -2 or of +2. So you're going to have more negatives, which means your answer is going to be negative. You can also think of the red and yellow chips. If we have more yellow or positive chips, when we take away some, the answer is going to be positive. If we have more red chips, then when we do our 0 pairs to take some away, the answer is going to be red or negative. All right, pause the video and see if you can do numbers 6, 7, and 8 all by yourself using the number lines provided, and then play the video to see if you got them right. All right, so one of our vocab words this year is going to be the opposite or additive inverse. The opposite or additive inverse of a number is the same distance from 0 on the number line, but it has the opposite sign. So in example A, they use -3.5 and +3.5. Those are opposites, so if we add them together, they equal 0. Same thing if we have 3/4 and -3/4. Those are opposites. If we add them together, they equal 0. All right, adding 3 or more rational numbers. So something that's going to come into play here is the associative property. Remember with the associative property, it says that grouping doesn't matter. So if we're adding 3 or more numbers, we can group numbers, so add certain numbers together first, and then add numbers that might be before or after them, and we're going to get the same answer. So let's look at example 4. Tina spent $5.25 on craft supplies to make friendship bracelets. She made $3.75 on Monday. On Tuesday, she sold an additional $4.50 worth of bracelets. What was Tina's overall profit or loss? Profit means the difference between how much you make and what the cost was. So she spent $5.25. What she spent, we're going to represent with a negative because that's money that she doesn't have anymore. And then she made $3.75 and she made $4.50. We're going to represent those with positive numbers because that's what she made. So let's come up with a plan. Our plan is going to be -525 plus $3.75 plus $4.50. Now, before adding a positive and a negative, because adding numbers with different signs is more difficult than adding numbers with the same sign, we're first going to add $3.75 and $4.50. So we're going to put parentheses around both positive numbers, and we know that this is okay, that this is still going to work because of the associative property. So I'm going to add $3.75 and $4.50. One way you can set that up is a way hopefully you learned in earlier grades, but just straight up and down, and then you start at the right and move to the left. So 5 plus 0 is 5, 7 plus 5 is 12, write the 2, carry the 1, 1 plus 3 plus 4 is 8, decimal goes straight down. So we have 825. Now we can add our negative and our positive. And I'm going to show you guys a neat little trick here. So remember the commutative property, which says that order doesn't matter, meaning 2 plus 3 is the same thing as 3 plus 2. And that's still okay, that still works when we have negatives. So -2 plus 3 is the same thing as 3 plus -2. So I can flip these around and have 8.25 plus negative 5.25, which is the same thing as minus positive 5.25, and now it's just a subtraction problem. So 8.25 minus 5.25 is 3. The earned profit was $3. All right, pause the video, try 11, 12. Well, try 2 of those 4 by yourself. Play it back to see if you got it right. And notice how I added if there were 2 negative numbers, I added those together first. If there were 2 positive numbers, I added those together first. And then if it was a positive and a negative, I flipped it so that it was a subtraction problem. All right, your homework today is to do numbers 1 through 15 odd.